Good afternoon. This is Jim Tritten from Military Writers Society of America. We're going to have another one of our periodic education webinars. Today's session is Nancy Arbuthnot. She's a retired professor of English and creative writer at the United States Naval Academy. And she's the daughter of a Navy pilot. You remember Navy pilots, John? Those are the guys that land on aircraft carriers. She currently leads poetry and art workshops for adults. Her books include Anchors Away, an alphabet book about the Naval Academy, Guiding Lights, U.S. Naval Academy Monuments and Memorials, and Blue Rhapsodies, poems about her life as a Navy-dependent and U.S. Naval Academy professor. So I will pull up the slide, and then I will go to share slides. And this is being recorded so that we can then use it again. All right. How about that? Can you all see the slide?
Oh, yes.
Yep.
All right. And that's all you see is the slide, correct?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Nancy, take it away.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Jim and John and Val, for getting us started today. And thank you all for coming, those of you who have shown up. I'm going to be talking about setting today and the importance of setting, how it can help move your story forward. In fact, what it does to help reveal the characters in a story, to highlight the themes of the stories, and to establish the tone or the sort of emotional atmosphere or mood of the story. So first, we're going to look at just some quick definitions. Setting is the time and location, of course, where the story takes place. Time can be described by the references to the time of day, the season, the year, or historical period. I also, when I was working with my students at the Naval Academy, I'd have them look at the publication date of the story and just think about what was going on around that time. Most people write and publish maybe a few years later than the story was actually written does it get published, but it's around the same period. So that helps us understand a little bit of the framework of maybe the writer's sense of what he might want or she might want to be doing in the story when it's set. So the location can be suggested by physical descriptions of the landscape or the built environment, that is, all the structures, the houses, the windmills, or whatever is out there that might be of importance in the story, and also includes, in my definition of it, the sounds, smells, textures, and other sensory perceptions associated with that particular location. And I like to refine down the definition a little bit more when, as a writer, I'm working on a story or a nonfiction piece. It can further be refined by naming objects in that space too. So what we're going to do today to start off is actually look at some ways that writers, and in a couple of cases anyway, they're writers you'll be familiar with, at least by name, I think. Maybe if you remember back to those times in high school English class where you read a William Faulkner story, maybe you read a Hemingway story, maybe you didn't read, let's see, I can't remember his name right offhand, another author that I'm looking at, Ray Carver, who is a kind of a minimalist writer as Hemingway is. Hemingway's stories. So you might not have heard of him before, but I'm using his work as an example today too. So I'd like to get started right away in reading just a couple of short paragraphs from these writers, and I will ask you some questions. So I hope you will share them in the chat, your answers, your responses, and then we'll look at those so we can have a little chat back and forth as we go through the presentation today. So just read aloud, I'll read aloud and you read along with me, Popular Mechanics by Ray Carver. Early that day, the weather turned and the snow was melting into dirty water. Streaks of it ran down the little shoulder-high window that faced the backyard. Cars slushed by on the street outside, where it was getting dark. But it was getting dark on the inside, too. He was in the bedroom pushing clothes into a suitcase when she came to the door. I'm glad you're leaving. I'm glad you're leaving, she said. Do you hear? He kept on putting his things into the suitcase. So this is the first paragraph from Ray Carver's story, Popular Mechanics. Now, I also will talk about titles, but we'll do that in a minute. I just want you to, we'll go through, I'll read it again, just the first, I think, 4 sentences. And I want you to look at what time of day the story is set. And we'll talk about that. Early that day, the weather turned and the snow was melting into dirty water. Streaks of it ran down from the little shoulder-high window that faced the backyard. Cars slushed by on the street and outside where it was getting dark, but it was getting dark on the inside too. Okay, so what time of day is it? You can just share some things in the chat. That would be great. I'm going to look. Oops. Let's see if I can see the chat. Okay. I used to have it on my side. There it is. Okay. Dusk, early evening. Okay, great. Dusk, late afternoon, dark. All right, good. That's told to you, so we can say dreary. Okay, getting a little bit into the mood of the piece. What time of year is it? Or what season does it seem to be? Or what else can you tell me about the weather, for example? See if I can move there. Early that day, the weather turned, whoops, go back. Did I do that? We need to go back to Popular Mechanics. The first slide. There you go. Okay. Winter into spring. Okay. Early winter. Yeah, depends, I guess, where we are. I don't know Ray Carver, where he lived or where he was setting this story, but it's late afternoon. It was, maybe it was a nicer day, but it's turned, and had been snow, but the snow is now turned into rain. The snow was melting, so possibly midwinter spring or turning into actual springtime. Now, what are some of the sounds in here that suggest the weather? Slushing. Yep. So that slushing is one of those clues, those auditory clues that you can use, that you remember to use in your writing. You want to use sensory perception. So here's one. The cars were slushing by. Okay, what about a more visual clue about just what the rain was like? The snow was melting. Streaks of it ran down. Okay. Streaks are running down the window. Okay. Okay, good. Now I just want to look at more details of the setting, the location. So what can you tell about where this is? The little shoulder-high window that faced the backyard, cars slushed by on the street outside. What kind of building is this? Where are we in the building? It's a back room, first floor. Okay. A residence. Yeah, it's maybe it's an apartment building, but it's got a yard. So maybe it's a single family residence. It's a little shoulder high window that faced the backyard. So any indication there more specifically about where the room is in location to the ground? Is it an totally above ground room? Or might it be a little little bit underground. And what difference would that make? Just keep that in mind for a minute. Okay, now let's look at some of the other pieces of information that we have about the location. So some of the props or properties, you would call them in stage directions. What are those physical things, that other specific items in the room that might help us determine something about what's the meaning of this story? It was getting dark outside. It was getting dark. Well, there are cars slushing by. It was getting dark on the outside, getting dark on the inside too. He was in the bedroom pushing clothes into the suitcase. Yes, thank you there. That suitcase. All right. And he kept putting those things into the suitcase. So that suitcase is there twice. What do you do with a suitcase? What's the purpose of a suitcase? Packing to leave. Okay, yeah. So look at everything that we know already in this story. There's something going on. Who are the characters here? Now, we're going to have more on character later, but we still, even when you're talking about setting, there are often characters in a setting. So we need to talk a little bit about characters too. It sounds like it's a bedroom. He was in the bedroom pushing clothes into a suitcase. Okay, so there's a bedroom. There's a door to the bedroom. The man is in the bedroom. She came to the door. I'm glad you're leaving. Hubby and wife, maybe. I'm glad you're leaving. I'm glad you're leaving. Look at the repetitions in here. Pushing clothes into a suitcase. He kept on putting his things into a suitcase. The weather turned, the snow was melting. Streaks of it ran down from the little shoulder-high window. Cars slushed by on the street outside where it was getting dark, but it was getting dark on the inside too. Here is a short paragraph, and yet look at all the repetitions in there. Yeah, we don't really notice them. So again, keep that in mind. What might the purpose of those repetitions be? An unhappy couple, a romance, both seem to be happy he is leaving. I'm glad you're leaving. I'm glad you're leaving. Do you hear? So why does she say, I'm glad you're leaving twice? And do you hear? What's his response? She may not be glad. Yeah, silence. Okay. He's giving her the silent treatment. No response. He just keeps pushing things in. And yeah, so maybe that's making her even madder, because I'm glad you're leaving. I'm glad you're leaving. But he won't respond to that. He won't say, well, anything you might want to say about somebody wants to be leaving and you're being yelled at. Anyway, here we have so much information about this little place. So just from looking at when the story takes place, the time of day, it's dark, the room's underground, so where it takes place, and who the characters are, what they're doing, a man and a woman, they in some kind of tension because the man seems to be ready to leave. He's not even talking to the woman. So, what do you think this story might be about, and what can the title tell you? He doesn't want to argue. He just wants to. Whoops. Hello, hello. So what is, does anyone know of something called popular mechanics? It used to be, I don't know if it still exists, a magazine. A magazine, yeah. So this story is probably not about a magazine, but what about the term mechanics? What's that a root word for? Or what are some of the meanings of mechanics or mechanical? If something is mechanical, it's not something that's thought out, that's not reflected on. Popular mechanics, yeah, the magazine was yeah, trying to build or fix something. But here you have an assassin. What does that mean? Popular mechanics. Ooh. Um, but yeah, acting like a machine. So maybe somehow this story has to do with machine-like behavior. People's buttons are pushed, something to do with machines or actions. The magazine was directed towards men. Yep. Um, and who is going to be reading this story? Maybe men. Maybe Ray Carver's talking to men. I think, like Hemingway, he probably did have an audience that was more male. So, what is it that he wants to be? He wants to reveal in this story? Something about these two characters. How would you characterize the atmosphere or the mood? So I think someone earlier had said something about, let's see, darkness, unhappiness, a failed romance. It sounds like a bedroom. He's packing clothes, he's leaving. Yeah, so the tone of the piece or the atmosphere is kind of dark, like the setting. It was getting dark on the inside too, and it doesn't get any brighter. He was in the bedroom pushing clothes into the suitcase, and what happens? Nothing. She's yelling at him. He keeps pushing his clothes in, so it's just going to get worse and worse, more and more mechanical, less and less real, I don't know, ability to feel and let the other person into those feelings. It's just mechanical reaction back and forth, back and forth. How to make that person feel worse. Let's see if I go down here. Okay. Pushing, not packing shows haste. I like that. Could be workaholic and she's tired of it. Yeah, there are all kinds of things we can start thinking about. And I think it's really when you're reading a story, when you're writing, you want to kind of think in terms of, after, at least after you finish writing, think in terms of your audience. What are they going to be experiencing as they read the story? What can I add? And I think the repetitions here in part reflect that kind of mechanical nature that the story is revealing, bit by bit. It's not a very long story. I think it's 2 pages long. And has anyone read this story before? Or some of you have heard me talking about it before. I like that mechanic, going through the motions. Yeah. So this story ends with 2 people trying to decide what to do about not only their own relationship, but there's a baby involved in it. And the baby becomes a major prop in the story. And the story is kind of based on the biblical story of Solomon. So you might know what happens to the baby in Solomon, or almost happens anyway in that story. So, any questions about this before we move on, or do you understand what I'm kind of trying to help you see, what how setting can reveal the characters a little bit, the darkness here, the fact that it's underground, their feelings are kind of in some way are suppressed. Some of their worst feelings are coming out, but their thoughts are certainly suppressed. There's nothing about why is he leaving and what can I do to prevent him from leaving? No, it's all just mechanical reaction. And the point of this writing style, real short sentences, it's how would you describe? I like to think in terms of the narrator as being a character too. So what about the narrator? What is the point of view of the narrator? How is this story told? Who is the narrator? Is there a narrator? I mean, there's not a person who's saying, I saw them doing this. So who is telling the story? Third person omniscient. Yeah, you remember those from the different points of view. You have first person, the I. You also have a first person plural, a we. And you have, every once in a while, you have a second person. You do this, you do that. There are some interesting stories based on just using the you. And then there's just the third person, which is he did, she did, just very much omniscient. And that is, it sees everybody equally in the story. It's just a very objective, almost a reporter reporting on the scene. You can have a third person limited omniscient, which means then you have a point of view in third person. He did, she did, but you might focus on one of those people, he, and then everything will be filtered through his perception. But this is Ray, and Ray Carver is known pretty much as very much a journalistic reporter, just writing what he sees right there in front of him. But of course, he's really manipulating things with the way that he describes the scene. So I think also looking at not only the characters who are named, even she and he are never named in this story, and that's significant too, because they aren't given individual characters. They're just laid out as anonymous people. It could be any of us. But then there's also the narrator, not named, just the basic viewpoint, sort of this omniscient, almost godlike figure sitting back there behind the story, telling it all. So any questions about this before we'll move on to one other one.
You're going to have to bear with me. I don't know how to move the screen, this forward without getting out of. Okay, there we go. Now I can go back to share screen, I think. I don't know how to do that. I can either peer. Okay, there you are.
I can just.
Can you see it now? Can you see it?
I can't see the shared screen, but that's okay. We don't need it right now. But
I'm going to get you this. I've just got to get to it. I am not as good as Bob, even. All right, there's the second slide.
Okay, let's go.
Now I know how to move them. All right, got it. I was going the wrong direction.
Okay,
Sorry.
Great. So, yeah, this is another little story called Ripe Figs by Kate Chopin, written in the late 19th century. And we can understand where she's writing from when we see the names of the characters and where it is. So I'll just read that. Maman Nanane said that when the figs were ripe, Babette might go visit her cousins down on the Bayou La Fourche, where the sugarcane grows. Not that the ripening of figs had the least to do with it, but that is the way Maman Nanane was. It seemed to Babette a very long time to wait, for the leaves upon the trees were tender yet, and the figs were like little hard green marbles. Okay, so has anyone read any Kate Chopin? She's famous for a work called The Awakening. Maybe you read that way long time ago in high school. Or where do you think this is set? What part of the country? Anything? Louisiana. Yay. Yep. And down in southern Louisiana, at least the cousins live in southern Louisiana. Because what is that like? I had just only recently saw sugarcane growing in South Louisiana. And that was pretty amazing. So it's kind of cool. Bayou La Fourche. And so you know that there was French spoken in South Louisiana. And Maman Nanane, Maman is a name of a godmother. So Maman Nanane is the godmother of Babette. So you won't know that unless you know something about names in French. Who is the? I'll just move over to characters for a minute here. Who is Babette? do you think? How old is she? What's her relationship to the land, to her cousins? What do you know about her as a character? A young girl. Okay. And main character, yes, very impatient. I was just going to say, how do you know she's young? Partly because she seems so impatient. She must be fairly young, maybe being raised by a grandmother, a country girl. She lives in the country, perhaps. You said that when the figs were ripe, so there are figs growing where she is. And then she can go down to visit. Does anyone know when figs ripen? I just happened to have gotten a fig tree a few years ago. She's too young to understand the symbolism of figs. Yes. So fig trees, usually it's in the late summer that my figs ripen. I don't know when they ripen in South Louisiana, but anyway, it's going to be a time when the time is told by seasonal happenings. Yes. Yes. Okay. So here we have an indication of when the time is. Babette is, and that time helps indicate something about Babette, that she is impatient because she's waiting for those figs to ripen. It's going to be a very long time to wait because the leaves have only just started to come out on the fig tree. And the figs were like little hard green marbles. Yeah, that's a very much a an image too of Babette and her sexuality. She's not ripened into a sexual being yet. She is still a little hard green marble. Um, that's why Mama Nanane has to be so careful to watch over her. And the ripening figs have everything to do with it. But we see that not that the ripening of figs had the least to do with it, but that is the way Maman Nanane was. Whose consciousness is that from, that explanation of the ripening of figs? Is it the narrator or is it Babette? Or is it the narrator being an omniscient, limited, omniscient third person narrator inside Babette's conscience? So it seems to me that yes, inside the narrator's inside Babette's head. Yeah. My mom. Now there's also yes, it's either Babette or the narrator. There is some attention to Maman Nanane because the narrator is indicating what she has said, but it's that the ripening of figs is the way that her explanation is who Maman Nanane is, and that is from Babette's perception. And then we see that more specifically in the next paragraph. It's seen to Babette. So now we know that this is going to be a story basically through Babette's consciousness. And it's going to be about a coming of age story, maybe. And that coming of age is sort of symbolized by the ripening of figs. So you have here some part, the fig tree, the figs with their little leaves that were still tender yet, and the figs that are going to be nice and plump and ripe in the later summer. You have in that image an image of time reference. You have a lot about the character. We learn a lot about the character Babette there. Anything else here? Sugarcane, ripening cane. So we have the time frame set. It's not late summer yet, but it's getting there. We've got Babette as a very impatient young girl. We've got Maman Nanane, who knows how to hold back the child because she knows she knows what time is going to do. So she is the one who has to maintain control over that child. Anything else there about the tone, the mood of the story? Mama Nene is set in her ways. Yep, she's set. And why? Maybe the people are just reading the chats here. Maybe the people are not that wealthy. Certainly Babette and Mama Nene, they don't seem to have much. We don't know, but they don't seem to have much other than the fig tree and to talk about, to be surrounded by. They don't. We aren't given any other items in their house or anything about the house where they live. All we have is that there's that fig tree. So that's kind of interesting. You don't need a lot of description, but your things that you choose to use to describe the setting can also be used to describe the person. Okay, let's go back to one more. Well, we'll go with one more story. Let me just check on my time. Yeah. Okay, the next slide, please. Just practice a little bit more, and then I want to do some writing exercise. So this is A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. Has anyone read this story before? You know what happens here? Have you read some other Faulkner? What do you know about Faulkner as a writer? What do you think about Faulkner as a writer? Just even from here, I'll just read this and you can tell me what you think of this writing. Is this something that you would be interested in reading further, and why not? It was a big squarish frame house that had once been white, decorated with cupolas and spires and scrolled balconies in the heavily lightsome style of the 70s. That's the 1870s, set on what had once been our most select street. But garages and cotton gins had encroached and obliterated even the august names of that neighborhood. Only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores. Okay, here's a comment here. Changing point of views that lose me. Okay, we'll look at point of view in a little bit more too. So here is, as Bob says, the opposite of Carver or Hemingway. This is, garish and heavily loaded and with adverbs and adjectives and long sentences. This is one sentence. No, two sentences, but two long sentences. Faulkner grew up in the same town as my wife's grandfather at roughly the same time. Wow, cool. Okay, it was a big squarish frame house that had once been white, decorated with cupolas. So what does this kind of style tell you about the narrator? And who is the narrator here? Well, look, okay, here's where we get into point of view a little bit more. Who is talking? It was a big squarish frame house set on what had once been our most select street. Who could be talking here? Someone, not just one person, but this is that third person or first person plural, we. Okay, now why would an author use a we in a story? What does that do? Just throwing it out rhetorically. What do you know about this narrator and how he describes things? And again, using the we, our most select street. It was a big squarish frame house that had once been white, decorated with cupolas and spires and scrolled balconies set on what had once been our most select street. Okay, what are some repetitions that you see there? Is there a phrase that's repeated? How about had once been set on what had the frame house had once been white. It had been set on what had once been our most select street. So, what can that tell you about this narrator and his perceptions of where he lives? The setting, the house is ill kept. Why might it have been ill kept? What had happened? So there used to be a select street, an elegant street in this town, but it has fallen on bad times. Garages and cotton gins had encroached and obliterated even the august names of that neighborhood. So there had been the big, wealthy, well-known, eminent families in this town or in this place. And what happened to them? What has happened to that old South? That landed gentry, they have been taken over by garages and cotton gins. So the mechanics, here we are back to mechanical things. Mechanics have taken over the way things should be, it seems like, according to this narrator. So where there's a difference then between what had once been and what is now. And there's some kind of judgment that this narrator is making about that. We don't know exactly what it is yet, but we can find out. The august names, so these important names of that neighborhood, are no longer there. Only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps. So, what do you think? Who do you know? What do you know about Miss Emily? What is she thinking? What does her house, how does her house represent who she might be, at least in terms of how the narrator sees her? The house is stubborn and coquettish. It's in decay, but it has been stubborn. It is trying to assert what it once was to some extent. It was once a big square frame house and it had once been white. Well, it's a big square frame house that had once been white. It's decorated with cupolas and spires, but the white paint has faded and it's only an eyesore among eyesores, but it's standing there alone by itself. What might that suggest about Miss Emily? Maybe she is there. So you against the rest of the town. Only Miss Emily. Only her house was left. What about Miss Emily? So anyway, looking carefully at just a paragraph, I think you can see how you can learn a lot about the characters, about their motivations, and you can understand more of what the story is about. So you don't know from just this paragraph what's going to happen, but has anyone read this story? If you haven't read it, it's hard to get through if you're not used to this style, but it is a pretty amazing story about the South and the fall of the South and the attempt by some people to maintain their standing when there's no longer any reason to or any framework for maintaining. There's no longer the money that goes along with maintaining that lifestyle. But yet this one, Miss Emily, is trying to do it. What about the narrator? It had been our most select street. the narrator, it seems to me, is setting himself against Miss Emily, or setting up an opposition between the town and Miss Emily as an individual. So that plays out in the end because the townspeople eventually they see Miss Emily. She's been rejected pretty much by the people in the town. She does have some suitors from out of town, and one who stays around for a while, but then he disappears. And then the townspeople notice a smell, a horrible stench around the house. And they think, oh, poor Miss Emily, she just can't keep herself clean anymore. But later on, they realize, and they just feel so superior. So they come around and they put lime all around the house to try and alleviate the smell. But then it's only after Miss Emily dies that they realize that, and they go in the house and they find Miss Emily's skeleton there in bed with a skeleton of the man who had disappeared. So it's a fascinating story, I think, about this southern town, or can be anybody, but a group of this narrator who's taken on the persona of this one town, the character of the town who is asserting themselves against somebody else who seems to be trying to be independent of how the rest of the town feels and thinks about things. And they feel so superior, they never even think about who Miss Emily is or what she's capable of, and that she is capable of probably of murdering her man who is going to go away. So anyway, just to give that away to you. Well, let's go back to unsharing the screen. And what I'd like to do is just, if there are any further questions or anything more about point of view, there was some misunderstanding about what point of view can be. But all of you as writers, whenever you write something, you take a point of view, whether it's a person, I feel this way, and that doesn't have to be you. It can just be the person in the story or in your memoir, whatever. But it's then you tell everything from that particular point of view, from the personal I, or from a third person objective, or a third person omniscient. A third person objective omniscient, which is the reporter style, or a third person limited, which is through the perception of one person getting into the head of one person, but still not using I, just using he, she, they kind of writing. So any further questions about point of view? Does that clarify things? And why is point of view important? Just because we all use it, we take a stance, and you do want to maintain a pretty clear point of view in whatever story you want to. If you're going to be talking from the perception of the criminal in a story, then you don't want to shift suddenly. I mean, you can do that. Raymond Carver has a story about a babysitter in which he uses three different parts to the story from three different perceptions. So he is consciously giving you the criminals, in one case it was a babysitter, and then the criminal who comes in, and then the perception of, actually, it was pretty amazing, an object. So you can even use objects for a point of view. But what you don't want to do in a story is just shift unnecessarily from one, or sort of suddenly from, and then all of a sudden you're in a guy's point of view, and you're in his head. How can you be in his head when you're telling the story from the I perspective? So you want to make sure that you just keep that kind of clear. But what I would like to do now is
John seems to have a question, I think.
writing. Yes, yes. Oh, okay. I don't see it.
I was gonna point out
Sending a
that
message. Oh, gosh, I haven't kept up with all the chats. Oh, sorry.
Not to worry.
yeah, no problem. I was just gonna point out that, and I think it's been brought up before, that the book "Girl on a Train," when I read that, it should have been obvious, I guess, because the chapter title subtitle kind of gave you a clue as who it was. We were swapping heads, but I
Yeah.
missed that, and I got so confused for a while with the characters and figuring out who was talking. And so, if you're going to do it by chapter, and if you're going to give the reader some helpful hint that we're inside another head on purpose, then that's a good thing. What we see a lot with books that come into our system a lot of times is from one paragraph to another, our narrator has gone inside of one head to another, but then another time is removed from characters' heads, and that gets very confusing to a reader. So you were asking a question about it, so I thought I would point it out. Not really a question, but
Yeah, good. No, that's a really good comment.
But
And
I do have a question though. It's when you were doing before the first snippet that you gave us, there was the repetition of "I'm glad you're leaving," and
yes.
I wanted to just have you comment a little bit about italics for emphasis. And for example, if I italicize I'm glad you're leaving," is different from "I'm glad you're leaving" or "I'm glad you're leaving." All those, depending on where you put the emphasis, it can really change the meaning. Because, for example, if I do "I'm glad you're leaving," might be maybe the other person. Now, when the only two people in the scene, one was packing and very happy to do so. I don't think we needed to know that wouldn't have worked in that case. But in other words, so the question would be, what's your feeling about using the emphasis? Because there's some people says that that's treating the reader like a child or something. Let the reader put the emphasis where the reader wants rather than you directing them. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I tend to not like to use italics unless I'm italicizing the whole thing, or instead of quotations, sometimes quotation marks. You'll notice that in Popular Mechanics, Raymond Carver did not use any quotation marks. He just had it, "I'm leaving, I'm leaving, I'm glad you're leaving," just out there like any other sentence. He only indicates who the speaker is, that it is something spoken when he says "she said." So, I think that's a really interesting thing too. And what does that do not to use those quotation marks? It makes you stop for a minute. So what? He was in the bedroom pushing clothes into a suitcase when she came to the door. "I'm glad you're leaving. I'm glad you're leaving." Yeah, I think I don't think you need to emphasize them. "I'm glad you're leaving." It's almost, she emphasizes every single word by repeating it. But there is, just let me put in a plug for poetry, since I do a lot of poetry. There's a famous poem by William Carlos Williams, who writes about an old woman eating a plum. And he repeats a line about the plums. "They taste good to her. They taste good to her. They taste good to her." Anyway, he indicates they taste. I can't remember exactly where he breaks the lines, but he breaks the line 3 times. They taste, breaks the line, "good to her" on the next line. "They taste good to her" on the next line, and then "they taste good to her." So he makes you feel those same things without emphasizing the word, but just letting the line break do that. Now, you can't really do that in prose. So yes, maybe sometimes you might want to use it, but I would use it sparingly, I think. Use the italics for emphasis. I don't know. What do you think? Have you all used it?
I have, and it's just an interesting point. I mean,
Mhm.
I've never looked at it that way. If I want to, especially when it changes the meaning, um,
Mhm.
it tastes good to her if you're doing "to her" or whatever, if you're emphasizing that. If I said it that way, that means I don't like it, probably.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So anyway, so I think sometimes sometimes you need to, if the sentence doesn't stand on its own and you want to make sure the reader gets it. But how can the reader get it if you don't use it in this case? Because by emphasizing to her, it changes the meaning. So sometimes you do. I don't think you want to
Right.
overdo it either.
Right.
So
Yeah. I'd agree.
Nancy, I've got a question. I'd like you to think about this. You've described how you inform the reader about time and place in the text, and that was done brilliantly. How about a method where you take the name of the chapter, you have the name of the chapter, and then you put it occurred here on this day at this time or approximately this time. What's your thoughts about using that approach, and then also still having some clues in the text where you're making it more clear what the objects are that define that time and place?
I think that can be really useful, especially if you're changing time and place a lot of times, and the reader, like John, you were saying, until you read the name of the narrator in each different chapter, you got so confused, and then you went back. I think that switching of time and place, and I've seen people do it, especially when they're working in non-chronological order or with different narrators. And yes, those times and places, I mean, I tend to skim over them sometimes when I'm a reader at first, and then I realize, oh no, I would get so confused about where things were and what was happening. So I think that's a good device. Yeah.
So where I used it just for the other people in the audience is I did a story that takes place over a 2.5 week period, and it involves flying from Norfolk, Virginia to the UK via the Great Polar Route. So you start each chapter with what day it is, how many days since the last time that we met up with these intrepid aviators, and they're in a new location every single time. They've gone to another place, and it would take a paragraph or two to define that, whereas you can just throw it in there as a single line and then you can expand upon it. So that was my use of that.
Yeah, I think that it's really helpful. And you'll see it in like epistolary novels, that is novels that are written as letters. So they'll often have a place and a date, and that's really helpful too. I have a question here. Can you use italics to show the narrator's thoughts, what he is not saying aloud? Yes, writers do that. But again, you have to make sure that you're in the head of the narrator all the time and not suddenly off into someone else's head, or then you'd be really confused as a reader. But yeah, I think italics punctuation is fabulous. And you can tell the importance of punctuation if you've ever had an experience with some legal issue and you didn't have a comma in the right place. That's happened to relatives of mine fighting over a house. And because of a comma, the house was lost. So anyway, I like punctuation, but I like to try as a poet. I sometimes like to try not using capitals, not using punctuation, just using line breaks. And you could try that in prose too. I've seen written out paragraphs where there's actually blank space left in between, not in like little phrases, and then a blank space and then another little phrase. It'll go over into the next line. So it looks like a paragraph with some blank spaces in there. And that's interesting. I mean, I actually took a class one time on the use of blank space in poetry. It was kind of fun.
Nancy, let me
So yeah, there
return
are
you
all kinds
to.
of, pardon me?
No, go ahead. Finish it off.
I
I
was
thought
just
you were
going to
done.
say there are all kinds of ways to experiment around with the actual writing itself, of how you get it out on the page, how it looks on the page. And people have tended, I think, to think of prose as being just paragraphs and indenting for quotations and so on. But yeah, there are these other ways you can think about it too. Just skipping space. A lot of stories will skip a couple of spaces to just suggest that blank space suggests a new time, a new setting. So you don't have to use a paragraph or a sentence to say, now we're going to move to, another time period. Just let the blank space, that new perspective kind of thing, new time, new place.
Could you also use a page break, a symbol to signify a change in location or a change in place or time? You skip extra spaces,
Sure.
and then you put a symbol in there, and that's easily one is done with asterisks, 3 asterisks. So in lieu of a blank
Oh,
space
yes. Yeah,
in
right,
prose,
right.
that wouldn't work in poetry,
Yeah.
of course.
And I know that again, but yeah, again with poetry, some younger people who are using the keyboard a lot more and not the letters, but the I don't know what you call them, not the numbers, the little things above the numbers, the pound sign, the at sign. They're using those to kind of mark space or to make the reader pause and stop. It's kind of interesting. So there's no reason you can't do that in prose too if you're doing a more experimental kind of prose technique. One class that I had in graduate school was actually a course in was it bibliography or now I think it was a bibliography. Well, must have been a critical theory course. It was, and we had to write a paragraph in the manner of Shakespeare, and then in the manner of Hemingway, in the manner of the same with the same information, but just write using you could use a Shakespeare sonnet. You could write a Shakespeare sonnet or iambic pentameter. If you were doing Shakespeare with Hemingway, you would write little short block sentences with only the verbs was to be verbs there basically. But that was very interesting. You can do that, and I used to actually have my students do that too. I would have them write one paragraph of description or whatever, and then rewrite the same thing, but in a different vocabulary, like a Chaucerian vocabulary, whatever author we were studying at the time. And or you could do it with, you could try to imitate Faulkner here, and you could try and write that same paragraph in the style of Ray Carver. So I think that's really interesting. We're not going to do that now, but I do want to move on to just getting you all to try something for 5 minutes to do a little writing exercise. So if you don't have a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper, go grab one right now, and we'll just do a little writing with thinking about description, setting, time, place, location of something, and put a figure in there. Getting too creative, here's just another comment. Getting too creative and lack of punctuation could cause reader to get frustrated and put the book down instead of turning the page. Yes. I mean, I have done that. And with these writers, these poets who were using these gobbledygook, seemed to me at first, punctuation marks for no reason. I just didn't read the words in between that much. And then someone said, well, blah, 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 blah. So I went back and looked at it again. I thought, there was something there. So, but I had to persevere, and I don't know if it was worth it. I tried to do it then in my own writing, and it was like just too weird. So yeah. Don't make the writing too hard. Yeah, you're writing probably for yourself a lot, but you also want other people to read you. So you want to reach out to the audience. And really, I think all of our discussions in this writing series is, how to make your writing more approachable, more readable, how to grab hold of the audience more, whoever that audience might be. Okay, so everyone got a pencil and paper? Okay, so I want you just to think of, yep, anything will do. It can be a character, it can be from your own experience, some recent thing that happened, nothing too hard, just immediately something that even happened earlier today, a place where you were and a person in it. How about something that happened over the past couple of days? You were in a grocery store, you were in your car, and just describe a few of the sounds and things that you hear and get some sense perceptions in there, things that you see. Maybe there's a wind blowing, but try and describe that location just briefly and a person and put a person in it. And let's see what happens. I'll give you, say, 7 minutes and we'll come back. Okay, now just read over what you've written, and I'd like to hear these if any of you wants read aloud. But um, just read it over to make sure you have time of day or season of the year, and that we might be able to locate where it is. It doesn't have to be, a city that we can name. It can be just on the sidewalk, but where some location that we can as readers can just tell you about. We can identify. And then the character. Make sure you have a character in there. And well, let's just see how you end up working with that. I think one of the things I would like to see is how does the character interact with the environment? What can that environment tell us about the character? So if we could, maybe should we read aloud, or maybe just reading aloud might be best, and then we'll listen carefully and see, maybe jot down some notes and see what we remember and what we can say about what we get out of that piece. And if there's anything else we might want to know about it that's not there that the writer could add in. So anybody want to read what you have? Yes, Wes, great. And Bob. Okay, so Wes, unmute yourself. There you go. Okay, or get unmuted.
He landed in lush greenery and was startled to see a group of natives approaching him. He undid his harness. He looked as I'm trying to read my writing here, but okay. He landed in lush greenery and was startled to see a group of natives starting to approach him. He undid his harness, and he was startled to see that the natives were as startled as he was. What was happening? Some natives approached him, all in ceremonial dress. What was going on? What is to be my what is going on here?
Okay, thank you. So let's just start with our perceptions of what Wes was saying. What did you hear? Somebody is parachuted into an undeveloped area where the local people did not understand about air travel. Yeah, that seems like it. Do you have any questions? Anybody else? Do you have any questions about the the pilot or who was ever fallen out of the plane or parachuted out of the plane. I guess I just have one question. I wasn't sure why he was startled by people being startled to see him, but maybe I was misreading it. I mean,
He didn't know what was happening, coming to him, and he was in this setting with some kind of ceremony going on, and the people were coming to him. They looked startled, and as he was
they looked what?
startled.
Startled as he
Yeah.
was. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So okay. So everybody is startled by each other. Yeah. Interesting then how that's going to work out.
It's based on a true
Wow.
story.
Pardon
I
me?
know. And one day Wes is going to include that story in the MWSA anthology.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm putting together an anthology. I'm about to submit it, but that particular story is not in the anthology. It's based on a true story, but it's a different.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about it before. That's why I said
Oh,
that.
oh,
Yeah. So, and Bob is anxiously awaiting entries for the anthology, and the deadline is March 30th. So, for
Uh-oh.
anyone here who has something that they want to write, please submit it to Bob by the 30th, because we have space and we'd love to have your wonderful words on the page.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. And I hope people do keep writing and submitting. So here's one thing from the chat. Eva, he describes the people, but not the scenery. Yeah, you did describe the lushness, but I wonder if there's anything else you might want to add, because it seems like these two different cultures and two different peoples are confronting each other, and maybe something else about the landscape that could, I don't know, highlight that sense of disconnection between the two. So I don't know what that would be, but what's that, Wes?
a child.
The child.
There's a child involved.
Oh, okay, but a piece of landscape. So how do you setting to help define the characters a little bit? So, and if there's some contention among them, how could a scene, just description of place, how can you use that to help define two different sides of something? Like I just recently read an amazing story by a crime writer that I never heard of. She was writing in the 60s, but she talked about the railroad tracks that divided the town from the countryside. And as the story goes along, that division between town and countryside gets more and more ominous. So anyway, just as something to think about, like how can you use landscape to help define the characters a little bit, the choices they have to make. So there's a great Hemingway story. Can't think what it's called. It's about an abortion, about whether a young couple is going to decide about whether the girl should have the abortion or not. But it's set in a train station, and there's a train track, and the young man moves the suitcases that they're carrying. Suitcase is important, image of leaving or of travel, of freedom to some extent. Moves the suitcases from one side in which the train is going off in one direction, moves into the other side where the train is going to go to the city where there are doctors and hospitals. So anyway, you can use setting. I'm just trying to show a little bit how you can really make use of setting and give it a little more weight than maybe you've thought of before. Anybody? Hills Like White Elephants. Yes, thank you. That's the name of the Hemingway story. Anybody else have a piece that they would like to read? Yes, Eva.
Okay, the familiar scene of blue skies, majestic mountains, and wide open spaces of desert, as far as the eye could see, was gone. In its place was a brown haze that surrounded my car as it rolled along the smooth black pavement, as if it was flying through the clouds to nowhere.
Okay, any comments on that? So you do have a pretty distinct division between what was, right? The beautiful clear sky, mountains, the desert, and then this perception of the car engulfed in some kind of haze. So you have clarity and you have haze. Anything else anybody recognized? A desert sandstorm, wildfires? Yeah. What, we don't know what it is, but that's kind of intriguing, right? So you
Yeah, it
kind
was
of
a sandstorm. We've had several lately.
aha. Okay, so it was a sandstorm, a desert sandstorm. So yeah, it's intriguing then, makes you want to say, well, what's going on here? Yeah, what does that evoke? Something bad is gonna happen, maybe. Yeah, it sounds anyway, we know something that once was kind of clear is now not so clear. Who's the narrator here? Do you think you're going to hear this in a first person or third person omniscient voice? I
Yeah, I
don't
said
remember.
my.
Was there a reference to a character in there, an hour or our car or
Yeah, I said my car.
my car? Yeah. Okay. So it's definitely first person narration then. Okay. So maybe this setting describes to some extent the thought process of this person or the sort of maybe even the subconscious. What was clear is now no longer clear. I mean, maybe that's it. We'd have to read the story to find out more, but it's certainly a suggestion there. It's a way that landscape can help identify the consciousness of the narrator. Anyone else? We've got about 10 minutes left. So yes, Bob. Abdur.
Yeah. Okay. I'm unmuted. Hopefully you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The wind raced across her face, carrying with it the smell of the ocean. She normally disliked being alone, but she liked being out here on the bow of the boat. The light from the sea, the light from the moon made the sea even more beautiful. She did not want to go back down into the cabin, but he was waiting for her. He didn't like waiting.
Okay, thank you. Any comments on just what you heard there as far as setting? What time of day?
Nighttime.
Nighttime. Okay, moonlight on the water. Okay, you don't have to say it was night, just moonlight on the water. What about other sense perceptions?
Ominous, I think.
Yeah, you get that the sense of the ominous impending sort of doom or something because she is one place and she doesn't want to go down to where he is, right? Yeah. Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
Um,
and the ocean and the taste of the ocean and the feel of the wind and
the feel of the wind. Yeah, yeah.
it,
So all those
saying a lot,
right.
a little bit of words. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just a few words can really evoke the atmosphere, the sense of impending drama that might be occurring. So I think
yeah, and if you've read any of Bob's books, you'll know this isn't going to end well.
yeah, great. Well, now, Bob, was that something new or something you've already written?
No, I just thought of it.
Wow,
I just
great. Yeah. Yeah,
I may
good.
use it
Book
though.
book number 28.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, great. Well, thank you all so much for participating. And it was great to have you here and talking with you. And if you have any questions or any suggestions or comments, just let me know through MWSA or nancy.arbuthnot@gmail.com. So just my name at gmail.com, and be happy to work with you further.
Nancy, can you
Thank
just put that in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put
Your-
that in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, that might be helpful. Thanks. Sorry, Jim, if I stepped on that.
I'll
That's
ask a
fine.
question. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Well, I mean, we have a college professor here, so I'm going to ask references or favorite, I don't know, books that you taught from or things that you absolutely think we should read as authors. Yeah.
Well, yeah, actually, I was, thinking over these examples that I had given. I thought, oh my gosh, these are all so old. I should really find some new ones. So I did look around a little bit, um, and one for other examples, and one was from Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. Has anyone read that?
Oh, okay. Wow. Yeah.
It's long and it's frustrating in a lot of ways. And talking about losing the reader at first, I was about to throw the book across the room because I didn't know who she was talking about or what. But I started it again, and I realized that she's writing about Thomas Cromwell. She only says he. She never mentions who he is. But it just read a little bit of it. I must say, I got tired of it after a while, but you can watch the TV series, but I got tired of that too. But anyway, she's an amazing writer, I think, in how she describes the different feelings and thought processes of this guy who came from nowhere, really, an orphan, and he makes his way up into being the legal counselor to the king, Henry VIII. And then he goes through all the wives. I couldn't even finish it because I just got so overcome by the reality of it. I mean, he was an advisor to Henry VIII and telling him how he could divorce his wife. And if he couldn't divorce her because he wanted to marry another one so he could have an heir, he helped figure out how he could behead them without any repercussions. And yet at the same time, these wives like Jane Seymour was coming to him and coming to Thomas Cromwell and just telling him everything that she knew. And so he was killing his friends. So anyway, that was but yeah, I'll have to think about that. Who some contemporary ones are. I have been rereading The Great Gatsby. It is an amazing book. It's the 100th anniversary of its publication. And I've been reading James Baldwin on his novels and his just descriptions of being a Black man in America and through a presentation of being a Black man in Europe. He wrote these books 60 years ago in some cases, and they are still so relevant today. And he is a beautiful writer too, very powerful. So I put a plug in for James Baldwin. Yeah, I'm not that good with contemporary writing because I just don't read that much of it. Some of our own writers are like Bob Dorr. I've read some of his, and Jim, I have read, let's see, I read one of yours, but now I can't remember which one. Sorry. But anyway, I gotta be better about reading everybody else's. I do a lot of reviewing, or I used to, but it takes me so long to review anything that now I just try and stick with poetry for the military writers, or for memoir, which I'm also very interested in. So I read a lot of memoir, and
Do you have craft books that you recommend? Certain writing craft books?
How about if I
Let's
take
think
it from
about
here,
those.
Nancy?
I'll send out a list because I think we've got to
Nancy,
go. Yes.
let me take this and wrap it up.
Yes. Yes.
So, can you see what I'm holding up in front of me? Military Writers has provided this numerous times to people who want to learn the basics, the craft books that you're talking about. A Novel Approach by Jack London. It's available very easily for you. Go on to Amazon, and Jack is our next speaker at the in May the 18th, and he is talking about starting your story and characters. So by the time you get done with all of these, and if you don't watch them live, you can see them on the recorded versions. You'll have a craft book which parallels this book, which you can get and read up on ahead of time. So, Nancy, thank you very much for a very informative presentation once again. And I invite all of you to please tell your friends and other members of Military Writers to submit to both the anthology as well as to dispatches. And all of how you do that is on the MWSA websites and Facebook pages. You can find all the information you need there. And anything else, John or Valerie, before we sign off? I'm showing pretty close to 2 hours, or an hour and a half. I'm sorry.
I put a link in the chat session for our events section. So if you forget or don't write down all the different meetings that we have, the Writers Education Series, you'll find them on that page, as well as our upcoming conference. And if you come to our conference, you get Jack's book for free. I think normally, isn't that the case, Val? I think we normally get enough for that. But anyway, there's normally at least extra copies, or they're for sale there. So that's a good link for that. And I also would like to thank Nancy for that presentation. That was great. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. See
Okay,
you next time. Bye.
John.